Welcome back to B.Hooked. I'm your host, Brittany, and first of all, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really thrilled to have you here, and I'm excited to be sharing one of my latest designs with you. I'm calling it the Minimalist Crochet Scarf. It's really simple, really easy, great for a beginner. You only need 3 balls of yarn, and it works up lightning fast. I think you're gonna love it. The first thing we need to do is work on that center panel of the scarf. This pattern is worked in 3 different sections. We're going to start with the middle and then we'll work outwards from there. The first thing we need to do is create a slip knot. We're just going to wrap the yarn around our index finger 2 times coming towards us. Then pull that back strand and lay it over the front strand. Then pull that front strand up and over the tip of your finger and then just pull tight. Now you'll insert your hook into that loop, pull on the working yarn to tighten it up, and we're ready to start creating our foundation chain. We're going to make 7 chains for the start of our pattern, and we're just going to wrap the yarn, twist the hook, pull it through. That's 1 chain. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now that we have our 7 chains, this is going to be the foundation where we work our first row of stitches. What we want to do is turn our work so that we're looking at the back of the chain. So right here, this is the front of the chain. I can see a nice pretty little braid. That's how I know it's the front. I'm just going to flip it over so that I can see all these little bumps on the back. Now I'm going to find the first bump that's right next to where my hook is, which you see right here. I'm going to ignore that one and then focus my attention on that second bump. I want to insert my hook into that bump, yarn over, pull up a loop, then yarn over and pull through 2. Now what we've done there is made a single crochet. And we're going to do that for every chain until we reach our slip knot. We'll have a total of 6. So we made that first one. This will be number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Five, and 6. Now if you're a brand new crocheter, it's going to take you a little bit of time to get used to this stitch, but this is the most basic, very simple stitch, and knowing this is really going to help you with future projects. All right, so now we have our first row, and it should look something like this. We're going to proceed with row number 2. This pattern has a really simple repeat, so we're just going to cover that briefly here. Now we need to make 1 chain and then turn our work so that we can start working on the other row in the other direction. Well, that chain 1 is not counting as a stitch. It's really just a way to get us to the proper height because these stitches have a little bit of height to them. We want to match that height with that chain, and we're going to find our first stitch. So I'm pointing it out right here, and we're going to single crochet. Now when you insert your hook into this stitch, make sure you catch 2 loops of that V before you yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2 to finish your single crochet. Now we're going to make 1 single crochet into every stitch, and keep in mind that we have a total of 6 stitches for our row. So we've made the first of 6. I'm going to find my next stitch. If it helps to look at the top, you can do that as well. Work your single crochet. And coming at it from this direction, I'm really just looking for these 2 little grooves, or these little bumps right here, and the groove that's in between them. That's how I know that's the right stitch. So that was 3, 4, 5, And the last stitch sometimes looks a little bit wobbly, and that's okay. If you turn it from if you're looking at it from the top here, you can see the V of that stitch. I'm just going to focus my attention on those 2 loops so I can slide my hook underneath them and make a single crochet. Now it's always a good practice to go ahead and count your stitches before you move on so you don't increase or decrease and end up with crooked edges. So looking at it from here, we're going to see that each one of these little V's or little braids is 1 stitch. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I know I'm on the right track, so I'm ready to move on to row number 3. Now the repeat for this pattern I mentioned is very simple. We've actually already covered it with that previous row. So I went ahead and I made 1 chain. I'm going to turn my work and work 1 single crochet into every one of my stitches. Again, keeping in mind that I'll have a total of 6, and I'm just going to work that all the way across. Now we're going to demonstrate that row one more time. Just to commit it to memory, I'm going to chain 1, turn my work, and make 1 single crochet into every stitch. Now for that repeat, I mentioned it's really simple. So what do you need to do at this point? Well, we have just a tiny little section of our scarf here, and what we're going to do is continue to repeat that same row where we make 1 single crochet into every stitch. We're going to repeat it over and over until you really get the hang of this. We're going to have a total of 252 rows. Now that sounds like a huge deal, but it actually goes really fast because we're only working 6 stitches. Now I do want to give you a quick way to count your rows because nobody wants to sit and count out 252. Well, looking at 2 rows of single crochet, we get this nice little line in between. So if you're brand new to looking at rows, this can be a little bit deceiving, we'll say. This kind of looks like just 1 row. This kind of looks like a second row because there is that nice line in between them. Well, just know that for every one of these nice little rows that you see, that is 2 rows of single crochet. So as you're counting along, what I do is I just count in between each one of these little grooves. So I'll say 1 and 2, and then I'll just take a mental note to myself that whatever number I counted, I need to double that or multiply it by 2 to get my actual number of rows. Another visual cue for you will be when you reach about the end of your first skein of yarn. That's going to be a good indicator that you are on track and just about finished with the middle section of your scarf. So what I'd like for you to do at this point is go ahead and work up that length of the middle section of the scarf, and when we come back, I'll show you how to fasten off, and then we'll tackle those side pieces. Once you have the full length of the middle section of your scarf worked up, all we need to do is fasten off. So we're going to just leave ourselves a tail that's 6 to 8 inches long. Then just trim that yarn. And then pull that tail through the loop on your hook. Just give that a little tug, and now it's nice and secure. So now let's see how to work on our side edges next. Now that we have that center piece all finished, we're going to work on our side edge, and what we need to do is just take a piece of yarn, create a slip knot, and then orient your scarf so that you're looking at the bottom edge. Now, it doesn't matter which side. This just happens to be the side where my slip knot is. We're going to do this on both sides. So you'll find your first row, and then just stick your hook just right in that open space. Then you'll place that new loop on your hook and pull it tight, and then pull it through the side of the row, and then chain 1. That chain 1 is not counting as a stitch here. It's really just securing on this new yarn, and we're ready to start going. Well, we're just going to be working with that single crochet stitch, so nothing new there, but the technique is going to be a little bit new because we're not working in stitches anymore. We're working in the side of rows. what we want to do first is insert our hook into that same space where we just fastened on our new yarn and make a single crochet. That's going to be the first stitch of our row. Then I'm going to look for the next row, so that next little open space, and I'm going to single crochet there. Then find the next row over, put my hook in that space, and single crochet. And then do the same thing for the next row. Now what we want to do is match the number of stitches lengthwise that we have rows, but not exactly, because we want everything to be nice and flat. And in order to do that, we can't place the same number of stitches that we have rows. So what I found to be the case is if you work one single crochet into each of the side of 4 rows, so we've made 4 stitches down 4 rows, then we're going to skip one. And so I'm going to skip this space right here and then single crochet in the side of that next row. And I'm going to start that count over again. So that's 1 stitch of 4, then 2, 3, and 4. And once I get to that 4th one, I want to skip the next row. So my next row would be right here. I'm going to skip it and work a single crochet in the next. Now looking at it from another angle is the total number of stitches that we're going to place from one side to the next. And that magic number is 203. So we're going to make 203 single crochets from this side of our scarf all the way to the other one. And it just so happens that when you're working through this repeat where you're working 4 single crochets and you're skipping a row, working 4 and skipping a row, that'll work through all the way to the end. And you want to make sure you have 203 stitches at the end of this first row. Now, if it's not exact, it's not a huge deal. We don't have a stitch count that we need to keep track of. So in other words, we don't have to make sure we're working within a specific multiple. But we want to try to make sure that we're close to that, because if we have too many stitches, then our scarf is going to be crooked or wavy on the edge, and we really want this to be nice and flat. Now, on the flip side, if we have too few stitches, then it's going to scrunch and gather it up, and that's not going to lay flat either. So try to make sure you get this first row as close to 203 single crochets as possible. Evenly space them in the best way that you know how, and then when we pick up on the next row, we'll talk about that really simple repeat again. So when you get to the end of your row, we're just going to follow our same pattern repeat that we did for the middle section. We're going to chain 1 and we'll turn our work. I'm just going to turn part of it here because I've got the full scarf here under the camera. And then we're going to find our first stitch, which is right next to our chain 1. We're going to make a single crochet there. And we're going to make 1 single crochet into every stitch until we get to the end of the row. Now we're going to work this repeat for a total of 7 rows. We did the first row, and that was right here at the beginning. We're starting on row 2. We're going to work this all the way until we have 7 rows. And here's a little sneak peek of what that looks like when you finish that repeat. So I've already finished it here on the bottom section. It's going to look something like this. You're going to fasten off, and then all we have to do are the finishing touches to finish our scarf. Now at some point, you're probably going to need to change to a new ball of yarn, and as a new crocheter, that can sound like a really scary thing, but it's actually quite simple. So here I have run out of my yarn. I have just this little bit of a tail left. You do want to leave yourself a little bit, so I'm going to say 4 to 5 inches is a pretty safe amount. You don't want to leave any less than that because you will have to weave this in later, and you want to have enough to do that. So I'm going to just work through part of my next stitch. So I'm working single crochet, so just place my hook through the stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop. And this is basically half of the stitch, and that's where I want the transition to occur. So I'm leaving my old ball of yarn right there, picking up the new one, and there's a couple different ways that you can do this. Some people choose to make a slip knot, and there's a little added security with that. Honestly, you don't have to do that either. What I like to do is just fold it down, and again, leave myself a tail that's about 4 to 5 inches. Then place that on my hook and pull it through the 2 loops that were there. Now that action or that motion completes that stitch. So I have a single crochet that's fully made, and the only thing I need to do now is secure my 2 ends. So I had what yarn is from my new ball and what yarn was left from my old ball, and here's where I secure it. I go ahead and make a knot, and I'll usually make a double knot. Some people don't like to make knots in their work, and that is just a personal preference. So you can do this if you don't mind, or if you do mind having knots in your work, of course, all you would have to do is create a slip knot, place it on your hook, and then pull that through, and you've got a little security. But for me, this does the trick. I can't see this little knot, and so I don't mind that it's there. So I'm going to leave this in place. I'm going to continue crocheting, and then I'll tend to these ends later. I'll demonstrate how to weave these in too. So once you've worked your 7 rows along the side edge, your scarf now looks something like this. We're basically 1/3 complete at this point. So all we need to do is fasten off in the same way as before. Leave yourself a little tail, then trim that yarn, and pull the tail through the loop on your hook. Then what you'll need to do is repeat the same thing along the other side. So you're just going to rotate your scarf around. You're going to fasten on in this first row, work your single crochet, keeping the stitch count exactly the same as before. Once you complete that, then the crocheting part of our scarf is done, and the last thing we'll need to do is weave in these ends and the fringe. Now you can choose to weave in your ends as you go, as I'm doing here. I've not quite finished up that 3rd little section there on the end, but I want to weave in some of my ends so I don't have to weave them all in later. So what you'll do is you'll take your darning needle and just thread your tail. I like to use these bent tip needles. I find that they're really easy to work with. And then you want to designate one side as the wrong side of your scarf. Now the cool thing about this stitch pattern is it's reversible, which is great for a scarf because no matter what angle somebody's seeing it, it looks the same. But in terms of weaving in your ends, you want to make sure that you're doing so all on the same side. So I am going to designate this as my wrong side of my scarf, and I'm just working on this little side tail right here. And I'm just going to work it down to the base of this stitch where it's coming from. I'm going to keep it on the edge here too, and just run my darning needle under this first row of stitches. And I'm going to go under 5 or 6 stitches, however many you're comfortable with. Pull that through, and then it's always a good idea to go back in the other direction. So I'm just going to jump over that last loop so I don't work out what I just did, and work back in the opposite direction. And then we'll do it one more time for good measure to make sure it's nice and secure and they're not going to come out later. Once you've done that, then you're safe to go ahead and trim it close to the work there. And that tail is completely finished. Now all you need to do is repeat that for your other ends. And next we're going to talk about how to add the fringe. When you're ready to add the fringe, you're going to need to make 34 cuts of yarn that are about 8 inches long. And we're cutting 34 because we want to have just one piece of fringe or one strand for every row on this side, for every stitch in the middle, and then of course every row on this side. And when you're ready to add those, all you need to do is take one of your strands and fold it in half. and then insert your hook through the side stitch of our row right here. So this is the first stitch in this row. I'm just going to stick my hook in that space. I'm actually trying to force my hook through the middle of this stitch. That's where you'll find the best outcome, is if you can do that. If you're having a hard time getting your hook through the stitch, you can just place your hook in between the first stitch and the second stitch, and that works too. Then we'll loop that tail around your hook, and then you'll pull it through. Hopefully it will come with you. Let's try that again. Pull that through, and then just pull it up nice and loose. And then you can pull your tails through that big loop. Now you want to make sure that you have the right side facing up while you're doing this, because then you'll have this nice clean little bar there that goes across. Now if you look at it from the back, it looks a little bit different. Honestly, it's not a huge deal if you don't mind the look of it on either side. As long as you're consistent, I think you'll be happy with the outcome. Now when you get to this section in the middle where you're working through stitches, well, that's when things get really easy. We're just going to be making placing one fringe for every single stitch. And you can see your stitches by looking at the bottom edge. You can see this nice pretty braid, and there should be 6 of them. So you'll just stick your hook under one of those stitches, then pull your little piece of fringe through, and then pull nice and tight on those tails. And that's all there is to it. Of course, you'll finish that for every single row and every single stitch. You'll have a total of 34.
Remember, if you have any questions whatsoever, I'm more than happy to help. Please direct your questions and comments to the pattern page at BHookedCrochet.com/minimalistscarf. And if you liked what you saw here today and you haven't done so already, go ahead and subscribe to the B.Hooked YouTube channel. And while you're at it, tap that notification bell so you can be alerted as soon as I publish a brand new free pattern and tutorial just for you. I'll see you soon.